I'm your host, William Hall, broadcasting live from Kingsland, Texas, USA. Another episode of Rabbi Moshe Shulman's Debunking Missionary Trains of Thoughts. All right, so I've got a little red flag I'm trying to figure out, but we'll figure out where it's coming from soon. Thank you, Rabbi, for joining us again. Always a pleasure to have you.
Not to mention, it's Unkosher Jesus number 8.
There you go. Very good.
That's the most important thing.
Yes, very good.
If you want to find the series, you just do a search on YouTube of Unkosher Jesus, and they'll all come up.
Yes, indeed. And let's see what we got here. I've got to check YouTube because 2 times I've set this, and this is so far all day. All the shows have been airing properly, but this one for some reason is giving me a red flag, and I don't know why.
Well, you know, Satan doesn't like the truth to come out. So.
Okay, let's see what happens here. Let me go back and start a new YouTube page. Give me a second, because I don't want you to get into any meaty stuff until I confirm that we are actually live. Okay. And pause that. Turn that off.
You're playing around with your stuff. Let me talk into something.
Okay, go for it. Your channel. Okay, well, apparently it's not doing it for some reason. There's something wrong in the setting. I don't know how I copied and pasted all these into the same shows. So, well, I am recording this to my hard drive, so I'll upload this after the show. So, Rabbi, go ahead and continue on, because I do believe it's on Facebook, if I'm not mistaken. And just to confirm that, doing that now. Yep, we are live on Facebook. I'll take the video from my hard drive and upload it to YouTube when we're done. So,
all right.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
It's always good. I want to keep. I should really. I do have a YouTube page. I should really put it all together and start keeping things up there.
That's a good idea.
Project TORAH Truth. I just don't really do. I'm lazy. I have to get somebody to do this.
I gotcha. That's okay.
Okay, so we will continue. Last week I was not feeling well. Today, Baruch Hashem, I feel better.
Amen.
No, I did not have COVID. I just wasn't feeling good. That's all. There's other things going around than that. Just that. But okay, let's. I want to go really quick. Just the main points that we've covered before, so we can finish up. Because I do have some more issues to deal with Unkosher Jesus here, and then what we're going to do is we're going to. I'm going back over my the YouTube pages, and some of the comments or criticisms or rationalizations, really. So we'll go through those again. We'll go through all of those, just so that people could see that we engage everything that people say. We don't let anything go by. We will engage it and point out the fallacies in these things, and then clean that up. And then we'll go on to our next series of lessons will be the historicity of the New Testament stories, including the resurrection, whether we should believe the accuracy, and we're going to show some inaccuracies that are there. And in addition to that, we'll do with the resurrection, of course. But probably before we do that, we are going to maybe have shows with Tovia singing. If Tovia wants to do it again, we have to keep that in mind. 1 second. That's an Israeli phone. Hello? Yeah, I'm doing a show right now for an hour. So, yeah. If it wasn't that you're from Israel, I wouldn't have answered, by the way. Okay? So, okay. Okay, bye-bye. You are now going to be on YouTube because I'm talking to you in the middle of the show.
You have to tell us who you're talking to.
Okay. Okay. Bye-bye. Zag is end.
So, 2 requests. Number 1, who are you talking to? Number 2, you should let that ringtone play out a little longer before you answer it. I like that song.
Well, number 1, I don't tell who I speak to privately.
Well, you said you're the one who said he was going to be on the show.
What I'm doing with him is totally different.
No, I'm just kidding. I was just being silly. Okay, go ahead, Rabbi.
It's a little bit of a Talmud of mine.
Sure.
Okay. So anyways, that's basically it. So let's go over very quickly what we did before. The whole tachlis of this whole purpose is to shine a light on what the New Testament tells us about Jesus and to evaluate, is Jesus really kosher or not? Or as I like to point, would you like somebody like this marrying your daughter? Now, we discussed a few things. We, of course, gave indications from the New Testament that Jesus was not perfect, but we discussed those things where Jesus actually did things that would, if another person would have done that, we would consider it a sin. Okay, showing that he was not actually so kosher, he was not sinless. We dealt with a number of issues dealing with respect for parents, a biblical command, one of the 10 Commandments, actions that he himself did, and actions that he said other people should do. Okay. Then we dealt with how Jesus is a person, what kind of a personality is, what kind of person he is himself, not the way he treats his parents, which of course is a commandment, what kind of person he is. So we dealt with how he deals with other people, examples of him showing anger, rather than following the way that the rabbis teach us in disagreements, that we show respect to each other, even if we might disagree. He showed considerable amount of anger, even when he claimed not that you shouldn't do it. After that, we went back to some other issues about Jesus. One is the story with the fig tree, where we contrast that within the Talmud. There's a story, a similar story, where a rabbi came up with a fig tree which did not have any figs on it, and he blessed it and it grew figs. Whereas Jesus came up onto a fig tree and he saw it didn't have figs and he destroyed it. We discussed that in the context of a biblical commandment in Deuteronomy 20 that we're not supposed to destroy fruit-bearing trees that you can use. And then we discussed about the issue of his treatment of animals. Jesus had his PETA card revoked from his action here, where he sent the devils into some pigs that killed themselves after that. And we contrasted this, of course, with, of course, the issues that it says in rabbinic literature about how we're supposed to treat animals, which was very, very far ahead of its time. And also we gave some indications that, for example, the Baal Shem Tov also took out demons, making sure, always being careful to make sure they didn't harm anything, contrary to Jesus, who really didn't seem to care about that. Now, we also saw that in these things, as we were going on, we were showing that in the literature, the apologetic literature, Christian apologetic literature, they really do not address the issue. In fact, in the last one, for example, we had in the Hard Sayings of Jesus, he said that, well, in those days that they really didn't think that animals had such a value like we do today. Treating animals in such a way was not really thought of that way, where in fact we know in fact that's not the truth. The rabbis themselves, of course, from that period of time did in fact show respect toward animals and treating them in the proper ways. After that, we dealt with the issue of what kind of a teacher Jesus was. Everybody thinks that Jesus is a phenomenal teacher, whereas we see from Mark that in fact he taught in such a way that his teaching should not be understood by people in general. He did not teach that they should understand, as opposed to Jewish teaching in Pirkei Avos that I brought back, and also from the Medrash, which is brought in Rashi in Parsha Mishpatim, that we're supposed to teach in a way that the people listening should understand exactly what's saying in the simplest terms according to each person's level, which is the way you find most people who teach on the internet. And I try and do the same thing, teach that way. But that wasn't Jesus' way. Jesus' way was only that certain people should understand, and everybody else should go other way. Then we looked at some of the teachings of Jesus, and we're going to go a little bit more about that, that are somewhat strange and are always controversial. These are the ones where he says to give up all your money, or to give up everything to follow Jesus, or give away all your possessions and stuff like that. Things that, in fact, we see the early church did, in fact, hold possessions in common nobody had. We see it's very common to be anti-materialist in this world. So it's not really a problem. But again, the question is, of course, is that something that human beings as a general can actually do? Is it actually anti-nature, whatever? But that's what. The next one I want to do is, let's moving on to one more teaching on the nature of that. And this is one that is, we'll get into it a little bit here, because historically we know, in fact, that this is the case. Let's start in Mark. I always start in Mark because Mark is the first gospel that ever came out, and usually if we see it in later Gospels is because they took it from Mark. So here we're dealing with Mark, and I want to deal with Mark chapter 9, verses 42 through 48. Okay, so let's read what it says here. If any of you put a stumbling block before one of these little ones who believe in me, it would be better for you if a great millstone were hung around your neck and you were thrown into the sea. If your hand causes you to stumble, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life maimed than to have 2 hands and go to hell, to the unquenchable fire. And if it causes you to stumble, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life lame than to have 2 feet and to be thrown into hell. And if your causes you to stumble, tear it out. It is better for you to enter the kingdom with 1 eye than to have 2 eyes and be thrown into hell, where the worm never dies and the fire is never quenched. Okay, now, in general, people look at this and say, well, of course we understand, it's not supposed to be taken literally. What he's saying is that you have to learn, to cut it off means you have to learn self-control. You have to, self-discipline. Now, we all agree with this. By the way, this is not something that anybody would disagree, the concept that you should have self-discipline. But really the question is, did he really mean it literally? We know from a historical case, at least of one case, where a very famous Christian, his name was Origen, actually castrated himself. We know that the idea of mortifications and, doing such things, of asceticism, was very, very common in Christianity from the beginning. Very common. So it's very hard to say that it's not to be supposed to be, I wouldn't say that it's totally meant literally, but I don't think it's something that you should say that, well, no, it's not something because there are people who do it. And I mean, we see here an example of it, for example, in celibacy. Celibacy is something that we don't see biblically anywhere. Marriage is considered something important, having marriage, having children. For example, Passover just passed by here a number of weeks ago. The Torah specifically says that with regard to Passover, that you should relate to your children. The whole idea of Passover is something that is handed down from one generation to the next generation of children. Having children is considered something that's absolutely necessary, whereas not marrying, as we see the celibacy in the Catholic Church, for example. And there are I know of a number of women and men also who just do not get married because they say it's better to get married than to whatever. But, this all comes from this very concept here for Jesus of saying, if these things bother you, you should have. If you think that you'd be too attached to it, but that's not really what we're supposed to do. If you look in the Torah, for example, a considerable amount of the commandments that exist in the Torah have to deal with living in the land of Israel and farming, what you're supposed to do when you farm. There are a number of laws that have to do with business, okay? The Torah actually is the exact opposite of the type of asceticism that we see in Christianity, and which is exemplified by this. The Torah is actually where people live normal lives in the world. And they live according to the Torah, and they use these things for Hashem. So, for example, when you have a field, you leave a certain amount off as charity for people who are poor. When you have you bring in your the things for your field, all of your whatever grows from your field. What happens is that you have to take a tithe from it. Some of you give as a payment to the priest because he's doing a service for you. Some you give the Levites who are also doing some kinds of services for you. But you have that. You're supposed to be involved in the physical, in the world, and doing things in the world. For the most part, that's what most people are supposed to do. This kind of an idea of extreme asceticism, which we find in Christianity, is something that is clearly not in the Tanakh. We don't see that there specifically. Now, as a discussion for it, I was looking for some insights, what they said about it, what they in the Hard Sayings of Jesus, this is discussed. So let me see what he says here. Okay, now in the discussion here is very interesting. He says here, I mentioned origin. And he says, in fact, it's not recorded that anyone ever mutilated himself because of these words in the Gospels. Now here's a little hook that he puts into it. There is indeed the case of origin, but if the story is true that he made himself a eunuch for the kingdom of heaven's sake, that was in response to another saying, at which we shall look later. Oh, so, okay, maybe it's inappropriate to say of this one, but there's another one that says it. But the point is being that you have to go and say, okay, how do you know which one is to be meant literally and which one is to be meant figuratively? And that is not something that he just says, he doesn't like it because it doesn't sound nice, but really it's difficult. Now, the union of eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven is in 1912, and he actually discusses it. So I'm going to just mention a little bit about origin here. It is reported that one eminent scholar of the early church, Origen of Alexandria, took these words with literal seriousness in the impetuousness of use and before the appropriate operation on himself. Okay, now, the reason why I know about Origen is because Origen is one of the church fathers. There's a limited number of church fathers. We have no idea how many more people actually took it literally. But the fact that a church father would do that sort of indicates that there's something to that. In later life, he knew better. In his commentary on Matthew's Gospel, he rejects the literal interpretation of the words, while acknowledging that he once accepted and says that they should not be understood they should be understood spiritually, but not according to the faith of the So he did it, but himself. And well, that's fine. Okay, he comes back on it, but again, it brings again the problem. What do you take literally and what don't you? If people are taking it literally, then that means that Jesus has not been clear in his teaching. If he meant it literally, that means he's teaching something which is bizarre and off the wall. But if he didn't mean it literally, as the indications is, of course, he regretted later on after he did it, but when he did it, he thought it was right. If that's the case, then all that goes back to tell you is that Jesus gave teachings that people listening to it wouldn't understand, or could easily come to understand that he didn't mean it literally, which again is an indication of a bad teacher. So either he has bad teachings or is a bad teacher, one or the other. It just doesn't make a difference either way. Now, here we continue with something which is important. Some men and women have abstained from marriage in order to devote themselves more wholeheartedly to the cause of the kingdom of heaven. The man who marries and brings up a family incurs special responsibilities for his wife and children. Now, the problem with that is very simple. Who is the best example that we see in the Torah, the Tanakh, of somebody whose life is totally given over to God? And we have to say it's a high priest. This week's portion, Parsha's Emor, talks about various things about the high priest. And we learn there specifically that the high priest is not allowed to leave the temple area. In order, he's not supposed to get, he's not supposed to go. However, the Torah tells us specifically who he is allowed to marry. And of course, Aharon, who was a high priest, had children, grandchildren. And we know that the high priest has children because the children are supposed to take his place after him. So, where is there the idea that you can't be dedicated totally to God and be married or have children and not give yourself over totally to serving Hashem? It's particularly not biblical. It's clearly not in the Torah. It's a contrary teaching from there, and it's teaching which itself is bizarre. Humans as human nature, let's deal with this factually. Humans, as God created us as human beings. Remember, denial of your human nature means is that you're denying what Hashem created you to be. We were created men and women, and one of the primary functions of men and women is to marry and to procreate and bring next generations into the world. That's what we're here for. That's one of our primary purposes. The Torah talks about it. The first command of the Torah is Adam and Eve. The first thing he said, be fruitful and multiply. Whenever we see that Hashem blesses somebody, what is the blessings that he gives? that they should have many children, and they should have a long life. With Joseph, when it talks about the very last verses in the book of Genesis, talks to Joseph, what does it say to Joseph? After his suffering, said, and Hashem blessed him. What was his blessing? That he lived to see the 5th generation of his children, and he lived a long life. Job, after his suffering, is an even better example. That says that Job lived for a long amount of time afterwards, and he saw generations of people who became immensely wealthy. So God specifically created this world and the rewards of it specifically for us. The idea of asceticism is not really in Judaism. Yes, there's fast occasionally and stuff like that, but the idea of asceticism is not something you find normally in Judaism. It's actually looked upon. Very strange. But again, this is what he's talking about. So either it's a teaching that we can't hold, or it's a teaching that's just poor teaching itself. So let's continue. The man who marries and brings up a family incurs special responsibilities for his wife and children. They have a major claim on his attention. Well, I can tell you from personal experience, and I'm sure those people, your parents, will tell you, having responsibility for children teaches the concept of having responsibility for others. The love that you have from children, your own children, teaches you what it means to have love, and you can translate and bring that love towards other people. Okay, so there's nothing that's contrary to that. Jesus attended his attitude toward the ties of the family into which he was born when he said that anyone who did not the will of the Father was his father, brother, and brother. So he brings back the issue of when Jesus said, when his mother was coming to him, well, those people were my followers, my family. Well, that's clearly contrary to the Torah. The Torah clearly talks about honoring your parents. The Torah has in mind an ideal of what a family unit is supposed to be like, what we as humans are supposed to be like. And of course, as you know, you won't find rabbis who don't have families. Baruch Hashem, I'm married. I have a number of children. I have a number of grandchildren. And Mitzvah Hashem, this is what the Torah is. When it talks about, in the Torah, it talks continually about people marrying, and that doesn't keep somebody away from serving God. The idea that it does indicates that this person doesn't know what it means to serve God. God creates everything in the world, eating, drinking. We all have physical things to do. Asceticism is not part of the Torah. And you can look through the whole Torah and see asceticism is not part of it. It's not a commandment in the Torah, not anywhere. Okay? Again, it was people like these, those who had taken on themselves the yoke of the kingdom, he proclaimed, who constitutes true family. Well, again, this is basically justify and rationalizing his violation of the honor he owes to his parents and obligations the Torah considers to be normal. To include the more restrictive obligations that marriage and the rearing of children involved would have limited his dedication to the ministry to which he knew himself called. Well, of course, we know that you're not going to find too many of our pastor friends who are not married with children and, who live long enough to have grandchildren also. In fact, they don't live according to that. If that's really what it's supposed to be, then how come it is that we find that Dr. Michael Brown has grandchildren? We can go through all of them. Now, unless you're trying to say that the Pope is correct, that celibacy is a proper way of serving God, but that's definitely not in Protestantism. But if you don't think that it's a proper way of serving God, then again, this is a teaching that either is not understood correctly, he did not teach it properly, or it's a teaching that's just way outside there. Okay, the next thing what I want to do is, this is a little bit more to do with historicity of the New Testament, but it also deals with the way in which Jesus treats people. What I'd like to do is bring a quote from the book of Luke. Chapter 11. Verse 42, I believe. 42 and 46. Oops, I forgot to write down the page. Okay, let's deal with this. This is we're sitting down with the Pharisees and talking to them. So he asks them certain things. He calls them fools, whatever. But now he talks about the Pharisees themselves. Now this is very interesting. Woe to you Pharisees, for you tithe mint and rue and herbs of all kinds, and neglect justice and the love of God. It is these you ought to have practiced without neglecting the others. Well, first of all, you do not take tithes from herbs and stuff like that. It requires different things like that. But really, is it true that the rabbis, the Pharisees rabbis, neglected justice and neglected the love of God? Were they really such hard and nasty people? I mean, you would think from that people would want to hate them if they didn't do justice. Let's read it again. For you Pharisees, for you love to have the seat of honor in the synagogue and to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces. Okay. Well, we saw, of course, Jesus didn't like it when people did anything that affected his kavod or his honor that he felt he was. You know, that he was supposed to listen to. He lashes out at the Pharisees because they disagreed with him. You don't lash out in anger at somebody who disagrees with you unless you yourself think that you're required to have a certain kind of honor. Anger is actually, the rabbis talk about, anger is actually similar to idol worship in the sense that you only get anger when you look at yourself as a thing, as something that's worthy of, as better than somebody else. If you don't, then you don't get angry. Woe to you, for you are like unmarked graves, and people walk over them without realizing. Now, he continues a little bit further, under 46. One of the lawyers asked him, teacher, when you say these things, you insult us too. Well, also to you lawyers. Now, I actually agree, the lawyers, they really, forget it. For the Lord, people with burdens are hard to bear, and you yourself do not lift a finger to ease them. Okay? So apparently he's talking to the rabbinic lawyers. That's what he's talking about. So they make a heavy burden. So let's talk about the things he says about the Pharisees. And let's see. Number one is that they neglect justice. They apparently rule capriciously without justice, and they show no love of God. They don't care about God. Okay. Then they look for honor. They want to be in a high place or whatever, and then also they make the loads of burdens on people. That is actually what people think of the Pharisees. The Christians speak of the Pharisees. In fact, we know, of course, the word Pharisee has come into the English language, meaning basically somebody who's very, much in things, but doesn't really, have a heart, whatever. So were the Pharisees like that? Or is this really just an example of Jesus not being able to take somebody disagreeing with him? And rather than having a logical argument that he could have, unlike by the way, that's you find that there's disagreement, but the disagreement based on reasons. Here you see just attacking. Now, is it really true that the Pharisees were people who were so thwarting of justice and so horrible like that? Well, we do have actually evidence of it, of what was going on. And I believe that's in the book of Josephus. Now, there's two places where he talks about the different groups, and he talks about the Pharisees. Okay? The first place I want to look at is in Book 13 of the Antiquities of the Jews, chapter 10. Now, the story here, I believe I brought this story before. This is a story of how Hyrcanus became a Sadducee. He rejected what was Judaism at the time and became a Sadducee because the leaders of the Hanukkah story, Yehuda and other, they were actually Pharisees. Because Pharisee was Judaism at the time, then there was a group for the Sadducees. So this tells how it came about. There's all kinds of stories. The Pharisees told him what kind of a punishment to give. So he says this. So he asked the Pharisees what to do. So in the middle of here. So the Pharisees made answer that he deserved stripes and bonds, but that it did not seem right to punish reproaches with death. Okay. Now what's important is what goes on. And indeed, the Pharisees, even upon other occasions, are not apt to be severe in punishment. One second. Isn't that actually what Jesus is saying that they did, that they were actually severe in their punishments. Let's go back to here again. You neglect justice. Okay. Or even more, where he says here that you load people with burdens hard to bear. You don't lift your finger to ease them. Well, that would seem to be the exact opposite of somebody who is not severe in judgment. Okay, now there's even more that we find out about this. Okay, the next one is, there's more stuff here. This is very, very important as far as historical stuff. In book 18, we also find it again discussed. Chapter 1. Now for the Pharisees, they live meanly and despise delicacies in diet, and they follow the conduct of reason. Doesn't sound like people who are looking into honor and sitting in front of the table. And what prescribes to them, and they follow the conduct of reason, and what that prescribes to them as good for them, they do. And they think they ought earnestly to strive to observe reason's dictates for practice. So they act in a very normal way. They also pay respect to such as are in years, give respect to the elders, nor are they so bold as to contradict them in anything that they have introduced. So they show respect for elders and do not even argue against those who are older than them. And when they determine that all things are done by fate, they do not take away the freedom from the men of act that they think fit. So they believe in both free will and there's some kind of determinism of free will. That's talked in Pirkei Avos. Another issue we should maybe come up on time. Since the notion is that it hath pleased God to make a temperament whereby what he wills is done, and so that the will of men can act virtuously and viciously. Okay? Doesn't like some people who don't love God. They also believe that souls have an immortal vigor in them, that under the earth there will be rewards or punishments according as they've lived virtuously or viciously in this life. And the latter are to be detained in an everlasting prison, but the former shall have power to revive and live again. On account of which doctrines they are able greatly to persuade the body of the people. They can persuade the body of the people. Why? Because they act in kind ways towards everybody. Whatsoever they do about divine worship and prayers and sacrifice, they perform them according to the direction, insomuch that the cities give great attestation to them on account of entire virtuous conduct, both in the actions of their lives and their discourses also. So they act with virtue, both in their lives, how they personally act, and what they tell other people to do. This is totally contrary to what Luke says, totally contrary to actually anything that you've ever been told about the Pharisees. Now, you've been told about the Pharisees, how wicked they were, but in fact Josephus tells us the exact opposite, and the factual matter is that people followed the Pharisees. Why? Because they were virtuous people themselves. Their character was such. And he contrasts with the Sadducees, who were like wild beasts. Now, taken with this, we sort of understand why Jesus, reacts towards the Pharisees this way. Because first of all, people listen to them as opposed to him. This angered him. We see that Jesus has problems with anger. And we also see that Jesus does not know how to deal with people who disagree with him. We see from Josephus that, in fact, the exact opposite was the way with the Pharisees. When there was an older person who would say something, they would not contradict that person. They would show respect. The idea of showing respect to others is, I think, the biggest thing that you need to take out of what Josephus says there, and then contrast that with Jesus himself. Jesus himself never showed respect to anybody. He demanded respect from others, but he never showed respect to anybody. Okay, let's leave that and go on to the next thing. Now, There's no discussion in any of the literature about that, because basically I'll agree that the Pharisees were the scum of the earth, the worst thing that's around them, whatever, they agree with it. But if we look at historical from Jesus, we see in fact that that's not the case. Just see that that's not the case. Okay, so now let's go into another issue. This one's a very interesting issue. In Judaism has a uniqueness, at least from the teachings of our rabbis. And we see similarities in the Tanakh. It's harder to find it there where this eye comes out. But we see clearly in the teachings of the rabbis. Judaism is something unique. Many religions say that there's rewards that come, Islam, Christianity is working. But Judaism is unique in the sense that it recognizes that even if you're not Jewish, Hashem will reward you in the world to come based on the kind of a virtuous life you lead. Okay? But let's look at, now we've seen already that Jesus, of course, doesn't really feel very highly, act very nicely towards people who don't agree with him. Of course, we've seen his anger. But let's talk in the specific case about non-Jews, okay? A non-Jewish person, okay? Or a non-follower of Jesus would be the same way, but a non-Jewish person, let's look at the non-Jewish people in general. Judaism says that a non-Jew has a place in the world to come based on their action. There's laws against what you're not allowed to do with a non-Jew. But let's see what Jesus says here. Let's first start in Mark chapter 7, verse 26 to 29. I'll start from verse 24. From there he set out and went away to the region of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know he was there, yet he could not escape notice. But a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately heard about him, and she came and bowed down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile, of Syrophoenician origin. She begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. Now I'd like to contrast this very interestingly. There were many rabbis who were known, Hasidic rabbis who were known for taking out demons and stuff like that. One of them that comes to mind is Mendel Feremenov, and he was known in his area. Even the non-Jewish lords would come to him, and he would accept them. He would heal the children, throw out the demons and stuff like that. He would do for them as if he would make no difference. Didn't say anything about it. So what does Jesus say? He said to her, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." Well, in this case, it's sort of weird. First of all, before we understand the way he says it, the parable he's talking is like this. If you have a dog, you have your meal at the table, and you usually throw the scraps. Well, the problem for that, of course, is halachically, we talked before, the law is you're supposed to give your dog first before you eat. The dog has to be fed before you eat. But let's leave that aside for a moment. What's saying is like this. You eat and you give it to the dog afterwards. But what does that have to do with this here? It's not like there was a line and this woman pushed herself into the front of the line before Jewish people that he should do for her and the other side. That's not what happened. It doesn't say that she pushed herself in. It says that she came to him. She may have sat been in the line or whatever. There might have been a queue for those who were in England to get in. And she went and I said, "No, you have to go. How does this parable fit the situation? Somebody just came to you who was non-Jew, who you could help, and you didn't want to. Then you go into what you're saying is that referring to them as dogs. What does that mean when we refer to dogs? Dogs are like pets. You're a nice little pet, you love your little dog, whatever. But essentially, they're not, you don't really care. It can be, they're there, but, you throw it to the dogs, it's not considered a thing. So he said, let the children be fed first. It's not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. So children's food for the dogs, that's what I'll do. But sir, even the dogs on the table eat the children's crumbs. So they get the crumbs. You can throw a little bit on the side. This we don't see. There's in fact a nuvi. It's very important for this issue. The book of Jonah, which we read on Yom Kippur. There was a city of idol worshippers. And yet Hashem sends a prophet to them. Very important for us. Enough of a prophet. Important enough. There are many prophets we don't know anything about, what they said. But important of a prophet that he's put within our Tanakh. This was something given to the non-Jews. We don't look at the non-Jews as like, whatever, not that way. Then it says, if you're saying that, you may go, for the demons left your daughter. Okay. So she had to convince him to do it. He wasn't really willing to do it. Okay. The same thing appears in Matthew. Let's look at Matthew's version. Matthew 15:21. Jesus got that place and went away to desert Tyre and Sidon. Just then the Canaanite woman, Syria, from the recent Canaan, have mercy on me, Lord, son of David. My daughter is tormented by a demon. But he did not answer her at all. And his disciples came and urged him, send her away, for she keeps shouting after us. So this is even worse. Rather than giving blessings to people, it'll come to even the Jews and non-Jews, which we see rabbis doing all the time. Sends away. He answered, I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. But she came and knelt with the Lord, help me, he said. It is not fair to take the... Then he answered. So first he says, I'm sent only to the house. I'm sent only for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Okay. But she came and knelt before the Lord. It is not fair to take children from the dogs. She said, yes, Lord, even the dogs either comes to fall from the master's table. Okay. Again, similar type of thing is we see, of course, the disciples, everybody telling them to get lost. And in this we must contrast with what Judaism's about. Judaism, of course, says that the righteous of the nations have a place in the world to come. We're told that we're supposed to heal the non-Jews like we heal the other Jews. And in order to have peace, we do many things. To live peacefully with our non-Jewish neighbors, we treat them in certain ways. Tanakh talk is filled with Jewish rabbis who are teaching a lot of the audience are non-Jewish people. They'll say, it's not to get send the lost with them. No, that's not really the way it is. But Jesus is that way. His attitude non-Jews, and we see this attitude actually permeating Christianity itself because it goes into the Christian religion. If you look at it, if you're not Christian, you're going to hell. You're not worth anything, really. The only reason why Christians are non-Christians is a desire to bring them to become Christians, not because of anything else. Not to do things, not for them as them themselves. Okay. Let's see. William.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, want to see if there's any questions there now, or do?
I do have one that's actually surfaced. Give me 1 second. I'll pull it up for you.
And then we can have call-in, by the way. Give your number to call-in. We'll do some call-ins to the end.
Okay, cool. So let's do this real fast. Let me pull this up here and get that question out for you. What's that? It was more of a statement, but it's definitely one you're going to want to treat as a question because I know you're going to have comments on it. So, earlier on, like shortly as we entered in, we were talking about Jesus. So a Messianic person has responded in and said, is using Jesus a substituted name? It's not against Exodus 23:13 and Joshua 23:7. We don't use Jesus because he is not the name of our Hebrew Savior. So whether it's Jesus or Yeshua or Yehoshua or Yeshu, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, there's a whole mishigas today about which name you use. It's interesting because the most important prophecy, Isaiah 53, well, that's not the name of the prophet. It's only English. There's no such prophet, Isaiah. It doesn't exist. It's in English.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't his name. His name was Yeshayui.
Right.
Okay. There was nobody named Moses. His name was Moshe. There's nobody named Joshua, Yehoshua.
Great points.
Okay. That's what the real names were.
Right.
So, the reason why there is such a big thing to use the so-called real name is because it's just part of the fakery with Messianic Judaism. And when we eventually get to Mike Brown's books, we're going to talk about Messianic Judaism and why it's fake. The other thing is we don't really know what his name is. The assumption is that his name was Yeshua.
Okay.
We don't know. Where's the source for that?
Right.
We don't know.
Right.
Yeah. And in other cases, his name Jesus. Well, Jesus is the name,
Phone number's on your screen, by the way, 8559.
Our Mexican gardener's name is Jesus, right? Jesus. Yeah, Jesus is also the name. It's just a name.
855-952-4253. Number's on your screen.
We use the name to denote who we're talking about. Doesn't make a difference. It's like, my name is Moshe. I get on the phone with all kinds of different people. And people pronounce it all kinds of different ways. But I know who they're talking about. What difference does it make how they pronounce it?
Right.
I know who they're talking. They're talking about, they're talking about me, These kinds of things are really...
Who was it that said
only
that?
a problem for people who are trying to pull a fast one on somebody.
I believe, I'm going to mention the name so they actually know we're discussing them. Sometimes people get in a conversation, they don't realize we're even talking about their comments. Let's see where to go. It is right here. 12 comments, I only see 4. Let's see the rest of the comments here. Very important because a lot of people don't realize even my background. I mean, I was a Messianic for many years, and I was actually offended when somebody called me a Messianic Christian because I'm like, Messianics are not like Christians at all. But they are. It just took me coming out to see it. So
actually, Messianic Christian is like saying a Christian or Messianic.
Right, but it used to be you couldn't use you couldn't
actually Messianic is funny because it's actually a translation from Christian to Hebrew to English.
Right. But I mean, you can't.
And people not even knowing what it is.
But I guess my point would be you can't effectively call. Hold on. Let me pause. Let me get this muted. Hang on 1 second. There we go. Okay, now I'm going to find who actually commented that. That was somebody named I want to say Nene, Nene, Cynthia Marcello. That was the one who said this. So I was Messianic for at least 5 or 6 years. This is as I was studying Hebrew coming out of Christianity, and you couldn't call me a Christian. You couldn't convince me that what I was doing was any way Christian because we didn't celebrate pagan holidays. We only celebrated Jewish holidays. We wore tzitzit, we wore kippot, we did all the stuff, all the prayers. There's no way you could call us Christian, but it's the same.
Historically, but under Oliver Cromwell, when the Pilgrims took over England, Christmas was banned.
Oh, it's banned in, isn't it banned in, not Canada, somewhere. It's banned in Europe or somewhere. I don't know why, but I don't know why, but I mean.
It might be banned because of being anti-Christian. We're talking it was banned in England because it wasn't a biblical holiday of any kind.
Interesting, very nice.
It's very well known, okay?
Right.
But in fact, if I remember correctly, Charles Dickens wrote the book A Christmas Carol in order to, sort of counter that kind of an idea of being against Christianity to show that there's really some kind of a thing about it. But, this name stuff is very important because I'm old enough to remember where it came in.
Okay.
It was bought in as a way of basically an advertising tool. It's very you're trying to say that you're different something else, so you use another word. You throw in a Hebrew word here and there. You do all kinds of things like that in order to make it seem like you're something different, where in fact you're just basically the same thing. What you're doing is your externals are maybe look a little bit different, but internally it's all the same thing.
Right.
All the, again, as we go on, we're going to get into a lot of these things. We're getting some more theological, but as you'll see as you go on, there's really nothing different between these guys who call themselves Messianics and your regular evangelical.
I mean, there are differences, but the problem is it's
the language that they use.
The most important thing is the thing that I had to get through to myself and through to my head was, if I believe in the Christian New Testament and their Messiah figure, regardless of what you call him, regardless of what you believe he did and didn't do, if I believe that guy was the Savior, that makes you a Christian, period. Doesn't matter what you package it in. So that's just so Messianic is another denomination of Christianity. It's like Catholic, Methodist, Presbyterian, Messianic. Same thing.
I spent some time reading some of the writings from supposed what they call messianic scholars discussing theology, and basically you do not really find anything in theology itself which distinguishes them from Christians. What you find is in what we'd say the dressing up of things, the way that they present themselves. It's more like trying to present Christianity in a cultural manner to Jews to make it more acceptable to them, not as something like a new religion. It's not like even it's not like say Catholicism was Christianity and Protestantism was a reaction to that. Messianic is not a reaction to evangelical Christianity. Messianic is taking evangelical Christianity and packaging it in a way that it becomes more attractive to Jews.
Right.
I remember Phil Goebel's book that came, How to Grow a Messianic Congregation, make a Messianic Yeshiva. And if you read through it, it's basically Bible colleges and churches, but having a Jewish veneer, that they should look Jewish outside. Now, what has happened, of course, on the time is that, which of course probably when you were involved, what's happened over the time is that, when you come up with things, people actually believe it. When you come to a second generation, they actually start believing the stuff, what they're saying. So they actually believe that there's something different when there really is no difference at all. Mm-hmm. And you can see that because, look at the intermarriage rate. Intermarriage rate among second generations is high.
Right. Very true.
They don't have any, they maybe have some, cultural feelings such as Judaism or whatever, but it's very high. The large amount of people, my understanding is that the large majority of those people who go to Messianic synagogues are actually not Jewish.
Right.
But are looking for something that they feel is closer to original Christianity than Judaism. Well, original Christianity was not like that. Original Christianity,
I'll tell you something else also. So as I mentioned before, my late father has had a synagogue, a Messianic Christian synagogue in the Austin area for a group, not an actual building, but actually a group that kind of moved around for going on 28 years or so. And he, on the website itself, and this is one of the first things that while I was a Messianic, I was very curious about. I was wondering why he actually lied about his family genealogy. He said that they're both raised from Jewish families, him and his wife, which is totally not true at all. We have no Jewish blood in us at all. But he did this to try to encourage Jewish people to come to the synagogue. And this is not just with him. This is happening all over the globe, And so this is...
If you think about it, it's somewhat racist.
Oh, yeah, right.
Maybe it's reverse racism, whatever, but, trying to think that, I have Jewish blood. If you're a Christian, what difference does it make if you have it or not?
Right, absolutely.
Isn't the whole thing Jesus supposed to be for Jew and Greek alike? It's supposed to be everybody. What difference does it make?
Right.
But again, what you're seeing, what you're doing is a certain degree of hypocrisy, which is basically, there's old saying, the difference between a neurotic and a psychotic is a neurotic builds castles in the air and a psychotic goes and lives there.
Right.
So, what happened is Messianic was more like a neurosis. It was like, making sort of a facade of it. And nowadays it's turned into psychosis where people actually try and live there. But it's not, there's no reality whatsoever. We're going to get, Mike Brown's first book deals with a lot of issues like this, and I do want to get into it there. So I'm definitely going to cover it in more depth.
Okay.
Giving an understanding of what things are. I think one of the problems is the distinction between Judaism as a cultural thing, meaning having Jewish ancestry. Mm-hmm. Like the kings of Spain have, for example. King of Spain has Jewish ancestry. I don't know if you know that, but he does. Right. But, or being Jewish in the sense that you have that kasher, that you have that connection with the destiny of the Jewish people, which is only through Torah. Those people who separated them from Torah, we've seen it very clearly starting with the Enlightenment. Those people who separated from Torah, they disappeared within a few generations. It's very hard to find somebody whose great-grandparents were Reformed Jews who today would be considered Jewish by every Jew of it, no matter what tribe.
Right. Wow.
Okay. So, it's part of the blessing to Avram, Avram Avini, that as long as the Jewish people keep to Torah, that they're going to exist. And we see that those people who get away from it don't exist anymore.
Yeah. Right.
Again, Messianic Judaism is trying to turn culture or into the basis for what Judaism is. Judaism never was about culture.
Yep, I hear you. Okay, so I had the phone lines open for a while, and no one called in. That was the only question I had. So
no one called in.
We'll go and wrap it up.
It's coming on about the hour, anyways.
Yep, it is.
The issue next week we're going to talk about we talk about Jesus on the cross.
Okay.
And we're going to examine it as to is his actions admirable? Okay.
Right. That sounds good. It's going to be a good topic. Okay. All right, Rabbi. Thank you. See you next week. Thank you for coming in.
Okay.
And
next week,
yeah, absolutely. And thank you all for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel, turn on notifications so you're alerted when we go live on videos. So we'll see you next week, same time, same place. If you're interested in more Counter-Missionary work, you got 4 books listed here. Rabbi Tovia Singer's Let's Get Biblical 2-volume book set available on Amazon.com and OutreachJudaism.org. Judaism and Christianity, A Contrast by Rabbi Stuart Federow from WhatJewsBelieve.org at Amazon. The other 2 books are on Amazon. Revealing Matthew's Secrets by Jason Lacrosse and Leaving Christianity by James Wood Jr. Shalom, shalom, everybody.
אני אתה אתם תמיד תמיד כולם ביחד חשוב מכל חשוב והכרחי להיות ביחד איפוק זו העוצמה ויתור זו הגדולה השאיפה והכמיהה אני אתה אתם תמיד תמיד כולם ביחד חשוב מכל חשוב